Hi everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Season 3, Episode 20 and 21, The Improbable Cause and the Die is Cast, which this isn't the first time we've seen multiple, like a two-part episode. Well, this is the first time we've seen a two-part episode with different names, but earlier we saw a three-part episode and each one had a different name. So personally, I don't like that. It gets confusing, and then I'm always trying to like count the episodes ahead of me so I know exactly where I'm at, and stuff like this kind of throws me off, but whatever. So, interesting note, first of all, both of these episodes were directed by Avery Brooks, the guy that plays Sisko. So that's kind of cool. He's directed episodes before, but all of the other, like, multi-episode together parts have always been, like, two different directors. So, for example, like, Jonathan Frakes has directed part two different times. He didn't direct both parts. So I thought that was kind of interesting. When I first saw that this was a two-part episode, I got really excited, and I was like, yay, I can do another live video, because I like to do the long episodes as a two-parter, but honestly, I did not like this episode, so I'm a little scared to kind of do this video, because you guys might lash out, like the last time I really hated a popular episode. But yeah, overall, I don't know, it just didn't do it for me. I don't know if I'm just not in the right space, because sometimes that does happen. Sometimes you just have an off day and something you would have normally have liked just didn't do it for you. Yeah, this episode, I would actually say I hated this two-parter. For me, it just felt really slow and really drawn out, which I did a little bit of research into it to kind of figure out why. And originally, this had just been a one-part episode, and that was it. It was just going to be one thing. But then they felt like it was a little too weak, so they kind of dragged it out, and they made it a two-part episode. And while I find that the concept of this two-parter super interesting, it really felt like it has like Hobbit syndrome, where it did not need to be this long. Like, if they had put like some sort of a subplot in there, I think it would have been a lot better, because they could have cut out some of that filler. But yeah, it didn't, whatever. So I'm going to kind of just go through my notes like normal. So I was super excited for this episode because it's all about Garak. And I've said over and over again, Garak is one of my favorite characters. He's amazing. And his shop ends up exploding, and they can't figure out why. It looks like an accident, but nothing's ever an accident on Deep Space Nine. And Garak has one of my favorite lines, because everything Garak says is great, where Dr. Bashir explains the story of the boy who cried wolf, and how if you keep lying, eventually you're going to tell the truth, and people won't believe you. And Garak's just like, are you sure that's what that story means? And Bashir's like, yeah. And he's like, I think it means you should never tell the same lie twice. And just walks out, and I was like, oh, that's why Garak is amazing. So we see some interesting stuff. Odo does his investigative duties to try to figure out what's going on. And it's kind of a fun little scene where he's looking at the different perfumes. It's like, oh, this is floral. Oh, this is musky. Oh, this is spicy. Well, let's mix all three. And the guy's like, no. They wouldn't like that. So it's kind of fun. Odo and Garak take off to like try to find out who blew up Garak's shop. They get kidnapped. I'm going to boil this down, and so because I didn't like it. So if you guys watching this are like, no, you missed all this information, please feel free to leave it in the comments, because I don't really care. I just didn't like it. So Garak is going, and they get kidnapped by Cardassians, and they find Garak's former mentor, Tane, I think is what his name was. And it turns out that there's a treaty, kind of, between Cardassians and Romulans. And they kind of redid the Romulan outfit. Like, it's not as puffy, but it's kind of still the same, like, checkered pattern. So I thought that was kind of cool. But it's basically a treaty between the secret police of both societies, of the Tal Shiar and the Obsidian Order. And so we meet Tane, who was the dad from 16 Candles, so I thought that was kind of cool. And he's like, yep, I'm alive, and then the episode cut. So it's like, okay. And like I said, it was really interesting. It was just really drawn out. And we go into part two. Romulans and Cardassian ships decloak, and everybody on ops is like, what's going on? Like, no, you guys got to stop. But they go through into the wormhole towards, they're looking for the Founder's home planet. And at first they're like, we need to go warp 6. And I was like, seriously? Are we still on the speed limit thing from the Next Generation? Because I thought we'd already forgotten about that. But then they explained like, oh no, this is for the cloaking technology. I was like, okay, fine. Sisko goes after them, which is kind of interesting because they talk about how, or some admirals from Starfleet headquarters are like, do not do this. And Kira's like, so they're telling us no. And Sisko's like, well, they would be, but you can't read that because there's too much interference. Which I'm pretty sure is something we saw earlier in the original series, at least, or one of the movies. I can't remember, so you guys have to help me out. Because I feel like that's something like Uhura and Spock had a conversation similar to that. But I can't remember. It's been a while. But what I liked about that specific scene is when the Defiant like backs out of the station and takes off. It is such a gorgeous scene, like the lighting of the Defiant and when the light comes on and the way it like moves, like it was gorgeous. Like I don't know, I felt like they spent a lot of time to get that particular scene right. And you can always tell, like if you go back to the Next Generation, like looking at the Enterprise D from Encounters at Farpoint to season 7, where you can tell they have a much better model. Like I feel like that's kind of what it is, where they start spending more money because they get a better budget. There's a really like heartbreaking scene where Tane tells Garak to question Odo, and he does, and Odo doesn't give anything, and Tane's like, do it again. And then he gives him this machine that prevents Odo from like liquefying, because he's supposed to liquefy every 16 hours. And like just that scene, like the makeup is amazing, where he's like getting all flaky and cracky. And it's heartbreaking because he's like, because you can tell Garak doesn't want to do it, but he's under orders, so he has to do it. We finally get to the end, and the Romulans and the Cardassians are just bombing the homeworld, but nothing happens. And it turns out one of the Romulans comes in and is like, okay, Odo, you need to go. And Odo's like, why? Because a changeling has never harmed another changeling. And it turns out this whole time, a couple of the people, a Romulan specifically, has been undercover pretending to set this whole thing up. Like, they specifically went to get the Cardassians and the Romulans to sign a treaty, to go there, just to have, like, what was it, 150 Jem'Hadar ships basically sneak up behind them and blow them up. Like, it's a brilliant strategy. And like I said, this whole episode could have been amazing. It was just really, really drawn out for me. I don't know. It's just me. So, for those who have seen this one, and then, of course, everything kind of goes back to normal. Garak apologizes, he's forgiven, they go back to Deep Space Nine, and then Odo's like, why don't we have breakfast together? And then that's it, the end. So, for those who have seen this one, did you guys like it? Did you think it was a pivotal moment in Deep Space Nine? Go ahead, let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys for the subscriptions. Thank you guys for all the comments on the Golden Girls and Doctor Who videos. Thank you guys for everything. I will see you next time for Explorers.